What's up, everybody joining us on this live stream? This is Ball is Live,
What
our
up?
weekly live stream of the Ball is Left podcast, part of the Crossover Media Network. We are joined today by Alex, the founder of Crossover, the host of, Off the Record. We've got Lakers Central, the Crossover podcast. Am I missing anything? I know those are the big three.
That's the big three. I'm actually working on some stuff
I think I'm having some trouble hearing you there, Alex. Steven, are you hearing the muffled?
Yeah, it's muffled. It's muffled over here too. It might be an input issue.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you at all.
Yeah.
You hear me now?
There you are.
There it is. Nice.
So Alex, founder of Crossover, host of Lakers Central, host of the Crossover podcast, one quarter of the record. How are you, man? Thank you for joining us.
I'm good, man. Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Steven, for letting me jump on here, man, and probably just rant a bit.
Open floor, Alex.
Yeah.
The open floor. There's a lot to rant about, and when you mentioned coming on, there was nothing better I could think of as far as what's happening right now and your perspective and all this stuff, and especially with what you've built and what you're continuing to build with Crossover. It's going to be very valuable. So we're excited to have you here.
Thank you, man. I don't even know where you guys want to start.
I don't know if there's like a
we can start
point.
with I think we could start with unequivocally the police are murdering people. And it's not violent. I mean, it's violence, but there's no other way to state it truthfully than to say the police are legitimately murdering at will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of stuff with statements, especially from owners, there's a lack of statement from owners, but especially with like a lot of these people in high places in sports, where they love to dance around the fact that the police are murdering people, and that is a direct result of those. I think it's those powers knowing where their money comes from. And since me and Brian are blessed to be a part of an organization that at the roots of it are aware and care about these sort of things, I think it's very valuable to say the cops are killing people and that's it. And that's how it is, and I think everybody should say that. I think every statement should say that. And I think any of them that doesn't, you have to really ask yourself why. And I think we know why. But yeah, I think that's a great place to start because I think we should start with that statement. The cops are murdering people. And it's really upsetting.
The cops have always been murderers. Yep. I don't know if there's ever been a time where cops didn't operate with impunity. Mm-hmm. And the only difference now is there's cell phone footage of like a number of these interactions. So, I mentioned to Brian yesterday, I'll be 39 next week. So I was born in 1981. And for a decade or so of my life, I remember Zach Morrison having a cell phone on Saved by the Bell. But like, there certainly was
gray.
Yeah. But cell phones weren't what they were back then in the 80s and early 90s. And so these interactions took place. I myself have been stopped by the cops, been forced to get on the ground, was actually accused of robbing a Burger King when we were nowhere in the area. My uncle in the 90s was beat by the cops here in Maryland, Rodney King style. My wife's grandmother's house has been ran into a number of times because the cops were looking for her brother. They beat him up. And these are the stories that don't get caught on camera, right? So I try to tell people, talk to a black person, and if they themselves haven't had a bad interaction with the police, somebody they know has had a bad interaction with the police. And it creates this dynamic in that you're supposed to be able to trust these men and women to protect and serve. And the truth is, you cannot trust them. When I was born, I grew up in a predominantly white area, and my grandmother, who I was raised by, my grandmother and grandfather for the first 15 years of my life, made it abundantly clear, you're black, all your friends are white, and if you guys are out doing something stupid, you're probably going to be the one that gets in the most trouble. Like there was never any mincing of the words. You know, they made it very clear that maybe my white friends might have been okay, might have liked me. Their parents may have felt uneasy about them hanging around with a black kid. I'm going to share this on you guys' episode. I've said this on Off the Record. My grandmother told me, as I got to puberty and started liking girls, she flat out said, do not get caught with a white girl by yourself. She made no bones about it. Like, if it came down to whose side people were going to listen to, they weren't going to listen to mine. So these are the kinds of conversations that like our parents have to start having with us literally from day one. Like,
right.
If you look any other kind of way, maybe you're talking about the 1, 2, 3s and ABCs while we're being taught how to navigate America. And that creates this amount of burden that I don't know if any other race understands what that really feels like. So let me stop talking so I can collect my thoughts. But I'm just going to start there.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to acknowledge, because exactly what you're saying here is that while other kids have the safety and security and privilege to go to school and learn what they're supposed to do, there's an entirely added layer, if not multiple layers, of survival added to Black youth and the navigation of a culture that has been targeted at you since the very beginning, right? And I think that automatically sets up privileged children at an advantage, and B, the thing about this that really and it's prevalent. It's prevalent here in LA. I mean, it's prevalent in all of America, but one of the things about LA, and this can project out to all of the US, is that in the early 90s, when there was a sweep of and I think this had to do with the 1994 crime bill, which Joe Biden had a big hand in writing.
Yep.
There was a massive sweep of arrests across LA and across the US. And, obviously the majority of those were Black men. And so while we sit here and understand that this is unjust, targeting Black people, but the thing that is a little bit under the radar is that set up a ripple effect of Black children growing up without parents, without fathers. And when you think about that, and the lack of resources that is pretty much created from this like single sweeping action, and then what you're talking about, this added layer of survival, it's just compounding on, stacking on top of each other, of this huge disadvantage that does result in I think the disadvantage when Black people are rising up and taking what is theirs and making their voice heard, saying, yo, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, it's exposing a crack of like, it's exposing the releasing of white control, projecting it into the future, like perhaps white people in this country are losing control of everything they had. And the problem with that is that if a white person lashes out, especially a white cop, and lashes out in a murderous fashion, there's no consequences here, and it's really upsetting, because like you're saying, it's just the inverse. There's consequences for every single action that you have made and will make going forward. And it's just completely lopsided in culture. And it's so it's just really upsetting to see.
It's that lack of accountability and consequences for the police that really make this thing even worse, right? And so Black neighborhoods are over policed, completely over policed. And like I said, I grew up with white kids, and every time, I grew up in the 80s and 90s where, the crack bill was a thing. Dare was a thing. Nancy Reagan on TV, all this nonsense, right? Your brain on drugs. I remember those things. But I also remember thinking, okay, this is directed towards LA, Baltimore, DC, Chicago, Miami. And I remember thinking at the time I lived in Frederick, Maryland. I mean, like, all those white kids were doing drugs, harder drugs than smoking weed, acid, coke. They were committing crimes. They were acting a fool. And I remember thinking, like, if they were a few shades darker, like, people would be jumping all over them and they'd be in a ton of trouble. Our neighborhoods being over policed and underfunded. So to your point, you've got this crime bill that happens that takes away a huge swath of Black men, Black fathers, right? And I'm a big believer in that jail does not make anyone be better when they come out of jail. Like, our current system does not incent you to, once you come out of jail, to be better. You go in, you're caged, you're treated as an animal, you will come out just like an animal. I think in the movie Blow, Johnny Depp playing George Young makes a really great analogy, and he says, I went into jail with a bachelor's degree in marijuana and came out with a PhD in coke or something like, or in cocaine or something like that. Like that's jail. They don't send you to jail to get better, to integrate back into society. They put you in there and you just get worse. Right. Yep. And then, Black women are left to raise the children on their own. Black mothers and Black grandmothers. Like I said, my grandmother and my grandfather, my grandmother was there. She was very much like my mom. My mom was there, but like, it's hard to explain how much, like, I had two moms. And so, like, and my dad wasn't there, not because he was locked up, but simply because my grandfather would say my dad was a pretty boy and he was out running the streets. And he was. I'm the first of his kids. He made like 3 more. And I didn't meet him until I was 17 and met him again at 25. And I haven't spoken to him since. And I'll be 39 in less than a week. So Black women are left to raise these kids, right? But then even if a Black father or a Black man wants to help, many social programs don't even allow them to be in the house, right? Like, that in itself is crazy. So there's all these layers of, like, fundamentally tearing down Black people. And in this country, I live 40 minutes outside of DC. And just a couple years ago, the National African American Museum was finally built. And I love that place. Like, it's hard to sometimes walk through, but I would encourage anyone to force yourself to walk through and see what, our people had to endure when they were forced to come here. But one thing that always jumps out to me is that the African American Museum literally sits in the shadow of the Washington Monument. And George Washington had 179 slaves. So every time I go past that monument, I'm like, oh, that museum is great. But then there's this shadow of this guy that, like, America loves, who not only had 179 slaves, but when he became the first president, you couldn't have slaves more than 6 months in Pennsylvania, which is where he lived, prior to the White House being built. So what did he do? Every 6 months, he sent slaves back to Mount Vernon and brought new slaves in so he can circumvent the laws in Pennsylvania. What does the current president do? Circumvent all of the laws that are supposed to be in place to govern, right? And so for me, not only is there an issue with how the police behave and treat us, but there's this holding up of all these figures throughout history who are trash. They're trash. And it's too simple to say, well, we're all not perfect, because the truth is we're all not. But, like, some of these people that America holds up are just literally the worst of the worst. Yeah. I don't care if they fought the British. I don't care if they built this. They own people. They raped people. Like, why are there monuments to them? I don't understand that. And that's not to erase anyone from the history books, but that's also not to make it seem like they're better than what they really were. They were opportunists and they were trash. So I'm ranting again, but
rant away. I mean, this is what we're here for. And I think think there's value in these rants, right? And I think one thing that you're talking about that's very important is why are these people? Why is there monuments to these terrible people that have violated human rights since the beginning of this country? And the answer to that is this is exactly how this system is supposed to work. You know what I mean? So it's not a broken system. I mean, it is if you're Black and it is if you're poor, but this is exactly how it is supposed to work. This is exactly how the police are supposed to work. This is exactly how fear is how we are supposed to be governed, and Black people are supposed to be governed. And so that is what is so upsetting to me about the monuments thing, is that these monuments are up as a celebration of these exact injustices that we see every day. Yep. And so when people make the argument of, this is history, don't rip it down. It's like, okay, this is history, but for who? The victor writes history. That's what everybody knows, and so you really understand that, like, and that's my problem. We've talked about it on Ball is Left a bunch, but that's my problem with any idea of reform. I don't want reform in any way here, and again, I'm not speaking for everybody here. I'm speaking for myself. I don't want reform. Reform implies that the system was inclusive to everybody or worked properly in the first place, from my perspective, again, for the 1% and white men in charge, like the system is working immaculately. And I think a lot of the violence we see is because there's, labor is starting to act up and say things that, oh, we deserve, to be, we deserve healthcare. We deserve all these things. And the people in power are really scared of that. Right. And that's what I've always viewed Trump as. I view, the election of Trump as a last gasp of privileged white people saying, like, shit, we're losing control. Look, we had a Black president for 8 years. You know what I mean? Like, we're losing control. Oh my God. Like, we have to elect this, cartoon figure of the most outrageous, like, fashion. And so to me, I just think that it's very important to remind ourselves that this is how the system is supposed to work. And if we want, if me as a poor brown dude and you as a Black man want change, it's not going to come from a reforming of this system. You know what I mean? And that's, again, this is how I feel, but I would like to see just wipe it clean, and for me, it's like, there's no, it's hard to imagine internal change, because again, the problem with federalism is once you're, elected to represent a demographic, you no longer represent that demographic. I think the idea of representation is purely imaginative, and that's just me. I know I sit on a radical fence sometimes, but it's hard for me to understand this idea of reform and its history. This is why, why are you ripping down monuments? I say, fuck it, man. I say, get rid of all of it.
I want to say something about a couple of things that are brought up. This word reform gets thrown around a lot. And like, there's talk about reform of, we got to reform the police department, the police system, all of that stuff. And like, Alex, to what you were saying, when people are sent to prison, the idea is that they're being sent there to be reformed criminals, right? Like, you're going to do your time, you're going to learn your lesson, blah, blah, blah. But that's the system that people are saying we need to reform is very anti-reform. There is no reforming of crime because it's not profitable. The prison system has been privatized to allow the legal use of slave labor. So like we talked about this yesterday, right, Alex? We're like, this country still runs on slavery. Like the thing is like the oppressors have just co-opted the language of the oppressed and used it against them. So they go, okay, so this word is triggering to them. Let's call it this, right? So like, we can call it prison labor, not slave labor. We'll call it prison labor or whatever it is, right? And it all started with the 13th Amendment. I'm not here to teach. Everybody knows about that at this point, I would think. But like, why are we expected to reform the system when the system that people want to, quote unquote, reform has zero interest in reform itself? And that's why I think the answer is you burn it to the ground and you put something else in its place. You create something else, like true care being placed for the people that commit most of these crimes that we're talking about, and they're crimes of survival. They're crimes that come out of being raised, as you were saying earlier, in a system that has a lack of resources. So like we're talking about like, and it's that whole ethical conundrum that is like in ethics classes, it's one of the first things that's talked about, right? Like stealing bread to steal your family. Is it ethical or unethical? If you're doing something to survive, that survival, that like there is no ethics in survival. You are trying to take care of yourself. And so to take somebody who was raised in a area with zero resources and to then expect them to abide by the rules, and the rules do not provide you with resources, is fucking crazy. It's absolutely insane. And that's why nobody should expect reform. Fuck reform. Like it's, and I said this yesterday, and like Steven, you just said it, we're like way past the days of reform. That's over. That boat sailed. And then the other thing we're talking about is like these monuments, and like the word history gets thrown around so much with it. It's history, right? It's like we can't erase our history. I've literally never walked past a monument and suddenly understood what happened. Like I've never walked past a statue and been like, oh, I understand that this came from this period, and like that's bullshit. Like there's no connect. Like you don't learn those things without reading about it. And nobody's saying get rid of history books. Nobody's saying get rid of the text. What the whole thing is like, it's not history. It's this glorification of those people that set these systems up. And that's why that shit has to go.
Yeah. History is an interesting thing because, people want to hold on to these monuments, but whose history has been erased? My history has been erased. You know how hard it is for me to backtrack and figure out who my ancestors are? It's incredibly difficult. I've done it back as far as like 200 years, but I know people like white people in my profession who can go back like every generation to when their family first immigrated here. But I don't have that luxury. And what's crazy about this country, I mean, there's a number of things crazy about this country. One thing that's crazy about this country is America loves to celebrate the American Revolution, right? We fought against the British. The British was taxing, imposing their will. We hate the king, blah, 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 right? At the same time, land was stolen from Native Americans and slave labor was forced to build up this country. At the same time, when you were crying that Britain or someone across the Atlantic Ocean was somehow making your life worse, right? Like anyone can't see the ridiculousness in what we celebrate here and what was actually going on behind the scenes. And that's a struggle for me. Like America likes to hold up the American dream in that, we're fighting for equality and things are for better. And America is just as trash as all the third world countries around the world that they pretend that we're better than. Like, so how like there are some people from around the world that think like every American is like beautiful and rich, but when you get here, you realize no, they're mostly poor and broke. I mean, poor and fat. Like Americans look like everybody else. It's just that TV and movies and the media portray us as being like gorgeous and wealthy. Like America is really just a third world country. Like that's really all it is. There's so many issues here. And so the system is working exactly how the founders wanted it to work. Powerful white men have all the power. I just read this morning, Jeff Bezos is up to $200 billion. I think he's made $87 billion during the course of this pandemic, right? Now, I'm a believer that if you create something, you have a right to monetize it. What I'm also a believer in is that everyone pays their fair share of taxes. We know that man doesn't pay any taxes, right? He's building a facility right outside of Virginia in Crystal City. They gave him the land. I don't understand why you give a man worth $200 billion land, whatever. But the thing about this place is that like we champion these people who quote unquote come from nothing. And he was given $250,000 from his parents. My parents didn't have $250,000 to give me to start Crossover or any other business that my wife and I have started. We were very fortunate. I thank God that my mom was as well off as she was in the later years of her life. But like, we're literally one generation away. No, we're probably a few months pay away from not being middle class. And that is crazy for as hard as my wife and I have worked and as hard as my mom and my wife's parents have worked. But we champion these people like they built something from nothing, when the truth is they didn't. And then in the case of Bezos, during the pandemic, I know a number of his workers were given like a $2 raise, but then I believe they took the raise back. And it's like, there's the way wealth is allocated in this country is a problem. The way the criminal justice system works is a problem. You mentioned that the prison system is privatized. It's basically slave labor. And every time in this country, black and brown people take a step forward, the country knocks us back 2 steps, right? So Lincoln emancipates the slaves, right? But then you have people pushing back on that, right? Like, it's supposed to be 40 acres and a mule. I believe General Sherman issued that order, and then we know how that it didn't happen. I don't have 40 acres or a mule, right? It clearly didn't happen. Civil rights bill gets passed, Jim Crow gets enacted, right? Then after that, then you have redlining gets enacted. President Obama gets elected, Trump then gets elected. Like every time, and even with President Obama, like I can't convey what it felt like for me, and my wife was then my girlfriend when he was elected. We were in our apartment, and like the feeling that it brought seeing that man get elected president. And I knew that like the presidents don't have, complete power in this country. It's supposed to be a balance and all these different things. But like the symbolism of that man looking like I do, sitting in that White House, a house built by slaves, like that meant something to us. And I'm also well aware of, even though we consider him in my home, he's a black man as far as we're concerned. He's also half white. And he had to be as perfect a black man as there ever came to be elected president. I mean, no amount of missteps during his time running for office. If he acted 1/3 the way Trump acts, there's no way in the world he gets in that office, right? Yeah. The country has this weird way of every time people take steps forward, the country knocks people right back. And to you guys' point, you can throw around the term reform, or you can say, no, this system just sucks and we need a new one. Like, so I mentioned American Revolution, all the things that those white folks back then were fighting for, all their ancestors basically turned into the exact same thing that they claim to have been fighting against 300 or 400 years ago. Like you got this class of people who are the mega elite, politicians or billionaires, and they control all the resources. They control all the decisions. I believe in voting. My ancestors fought to vote, so I vote. I typically vote for the lesser of two evils. That's how my life works. I don't get to have like the perfect candidate. And we do, and like I said, in this house, we love Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, but we don't get perfect candidates. And so I'm left to think, where are we going to go after this? Like every other week, there's a black dude shot laying on the concrete and it's caught on camera. I honestly thought, guys, remember when the riots or the protests in Charlottesville happened and that white dude rammed his car and killed that white woman? And so I've been to Charlotte a number of times. I cover a number of bank branches and employees that are there in Charlotte. So I remember thinking when that happened, okay, it's okay for these cops to kill and these militias to kill black dudes, black women as well. But you kill a white woman, that's going to make the country stop. Like, I thought that would be like, oh, wait, you can't kill one of our own, right? And it didn't stop anything. And I'm just like, okay, well, we need to stop trying to convey how we feel to people like to their morals. We need to stop trying to pull at their heartstrings. They don't care. They simply don't care. When a police chief comes out in Kenosha and says, well, if these people wouldn't have been out past curfew, they wouldn't have got shot. Really? So no, not the 17-year-old, the minor that had a semi-automatic. He's not the problem. It's people being out past curfew that's the problem. I'm like, well, who elects these people? Who puts these people in power? And the truth is, this is the system that the majority of America wants. This is the system that America wants. And I don't know if in my lifetime it's ever going to change. So
yeah, I mean, a couple things there. Like I'm not an optimistic person. I know I've said that a lot. I don't know if I would say this is the system that the majority of America wants. I actually think that majority of people in this country are leaning to the left and want to see change. I think the problem is the amount of power in this country is so concentrated to such a small amount of people that the people don't have the power. And like, that's the problem, right? And like, that's why, it's a really cliche saying, but like, power to the people. It's like, yeah, because I think the majority of people would absolutely push for change on this, right? And like, I do think like when you look at the population in this country, and it is typically on the coasts, they are very much like, no, this is not like, we want to move forward from this. We want to move on from this. White people are no longer the majority of this country. And so, but the problem is the power is concentrated in the hands of the white elite. Right. And so that's what the problem is. And like what you were saying, like the history of like just everything, like one step forward, two steps back, like that's what I almost feel like, the phrase or term systemic racism gets thrown around, and a lot of people, that aren't knowing kind of think systemic racism is like police brutality. And it's like, that's such a section of what it is. Like you could literally get rid of the police force and your fight to end systemic racism is not over. It's built in everything. Like to your point where you're saying you have a hard time tracking back your history, like it's built into like last names. There's a reason why you don't see many white people with the last name Washington or Jefferson. And it's because those names came from those very famous country leading slave owners, right? Like the slaves typically took on the last name of their slave owners. That's why that's the case. Like it's literally built in the way people are named, let alone the way cities are built, right? And we see it here, like in California. So they're building here in LA, they're building a new metro line that goes from LAX that meets up to another metro line. Well, here in I live here in South Los Angeles, South Central. They're putting the line up on Crenshaw Boulevard. It's one of the only metro lines that's on the street. It's not under the street and it's not on its own path above the street. They're literally taking away part of Crenshaw Boulevard to put that train to run through. You're taking away one of the main valves that moves through this area, and you're putting a train on it, and you're cutting down the amount of space people have to move around it. And it's sitting on top of everything. It like literally comes down to that. In the Bay Area where Steven's from, there are certain freeways that big 18-wheeler trucks are not allowed to go on because of pollution issues and stuff like that. If you literally look at that map of the freeways that they're not allowed to go on, they go through the white affluent neighborhoods. So those trucks and all that pollution is not allowed to go through those neighborhoods. They go through East Oakland and the bottom part of West Oakland and all of that. And they go through those areas because the city planners have said that's an okay area to go pollute. Right. And so it's not just in the police, all of that. It's literally the entire fucking system has to be burned down and start over again. It's like, and that's, I don't know. I'm ranting myself here, and it's probably not my space to rant in, but it's just like, to me, like the police brutality thing is like a slice of the pie of what needs to change for any of this to truly end.
It's about having compassion for somebody that doesn't look and sound like you. And people have a hard time having compassion for somebody that doesn't look and sound like them, right? So you mentioned that metro line running through South Central. So my wife is from Prince George's County in Maryland. Prince George's County is the wealthiest black county in America. Yet somehow, some way, it's the wealthiest black county in the country, yet it has one of the worst crime rates. And when the pandemic hit, it was one of the worst places hit by the pandemic in Maryland. And I'm thinking, wait, how could this wealthy, affluent place suffer so much, like comparable to maybe a similar wealthy white neighborhood? They would have all the resources, they'd have what they needed. But this place, despite being a wealthy black area, is struggling as if it's, a poor black area or a poor anything area. And I feel like that's because that's how society wants these things to operate. There's just this lack of compassion, man. Like so here's some of the things that like we have to think about, that I think about when I'm out in my day-to-day life. So there's a bank in Virginia that offered me, this was a year ago. Yeah, almost 2 years ago. The largest salary I've ever had in my life. And I remember getting that offer and thinking, wow, like this is pretty cool. It was like 30,000 more than what I had made the previous year. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is one of the things I've worked for. And also thinking at the time, that bank was actually established with slave money from George Washington. Who the hell has to think about that when they're making a decision about their career, right? Like, there's like an ethical conundrum for me. Like, it's a lot of money, and I have a family, and I want to do well. But like, this bank was literally founded on slave money. And those are things that like I think about when I'm out and about thinking about where I'm going to work or where I'm going to shop at or in all these things. And it's like, those are increased burdens that everybody else just doesn't have to deal with. Like, and there's just all this stress that comes with that people just think, Stephen, Brian, you mentioned this yesterday, like the bootstrapping. People love to talk about bootstrapping. But like Dr. King said, man, like, it's a cruel joke to tell somebody without bootstraps to pull up their boots. And this country does a whole lot of that. Like, work hard, go to school, do all the right things. Like, there's no guarantee anything is going to work out for you if you do the quote unquote right things. So I never, like I said, I said this yesterday, but I never thought that like I'd be dealing with some of the same things that my grandfather was dealing with. And when he's told me stories of what it was like, he was born in 1938. And he tells me stories about the land that he lived on that was originally slave land, and how the dude that owned the land at the time wouldn't allow, I think, his dad to go to college because his dad was helping my grandfather's mom. My grandfather's grandmother pay for pay rent or whatever, and the owner of the land was like, if you go to school, I'm going to evict her and all this stuff, and like just impeding progress for my grandfather's family. Like, that amount of trauma that he had to grow up with, and that he still probably deals with on some level today. Like, that's why I say I don't know if this is even going to get better in my lifetime, because we've come a long way. Like, I do remind people, like, the civil rights movement was just like 60 years ago. Like, there's still people alive, like my grandfather who's 80 years old, that remembers what it was like before that. But like, we've got so much further to go. And the way the things are, the rules and the laws and the class system and all these things are rooted within American culture, I think we're several generations away from, you know what? I don't think there's ever going to be equality. I don't think there's ever going to be equality. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but I just don't think there's ever going to be equality in this country.
And I personally think that a part of that is because, I think most of it is because of the culture. And this culture, like that you're talking about, where there's this idea that's pitched that if in capitalism, if you come to this country as an immigrant or whatever, and you make the right movements, you make a few strategic decisions and be smart and do this, you will break into, the middle class and then eventually the upper class. There is a thing of vertical movement. Well, we know that that's bullshit, but B, that ideology otherizes like everyone but you. There's a individualistic nature to the capitalist ideals where it's you against the world. It's you against this. You can do, when in fact, if we look at this country as a whole, and especially in like a global economy, there's no reason that there should be, LA should have the biggest homeless population. There's no reason that people should be sleeping on the streets. Brian talked earlier about the idea of ethics. Well, if is it ethical to steal bread if you're feeding your family? Fuck that. I say fuck that, because ethics only exist in relation to resources. There is plenty of resources in this country. So I don't even think, I understand the argument, but if we can look one layer further, that is an invalid argument. There are resources here. Nobody should be having this ethical conundrum of like, oh, I have to steal this, but I have to feed my families. And same thing that we talk about, and what a lot of, Ball is Left is about is, I do consider myself someone that cares about human beings. I care about the well-being of everybody. I'm a firm firm believer that no one is saved until everyone is saved. Okay. But on top of that, I spend my life navigating shit that I have to think about, just like you're talking about how, you know, you got a raise in the salary, but you have to think about where the money's coming from, what the industry is. And, you know, like, do I think people that work for Jeff Bezos are terrible people? No, because the thing is, in a system that believes in human rights and in a system that cares about human beings, we wouldn't have to navigate this stuff. You know what I mean? Like us having these internal conundrums, and sometimes it goes as far as like internal violence against yourself. Like, what am I like? Why? What am I doing? Like, why am I a bad person? Am I not? That is a product of our environment, and it doesn't. And this is what I mean when I want to go further into reform, further away from reform, and just break it down. Is that like that internalization of conflict is a product of our environment. This idea that like, I am a human. If I make the right decisions, I can get ahead in this life. Well, that makes sense, I guess, if there's like super limited resources. But again, in this global economy, and we're talking about the US, you know what I mean? We have one man that we know his name who can fix all these problems. So it's like, it's not fair. Like, and when you talk about equality, I do agree with you that it's going to be a huge, long process. And unfortunately, I think that it has to do with this ideology in the first place. I can do this. I can do this. And the other thing is like the otherizing of everyone else. When you think of yourself as opposed to the group, you know, a lot of these successes that we have are hierarchical, right? Like I can only get ahead by, you know, stepping on this person, and, you know, I care about that person, so I want to do it as gently as possible. But I mean, let's be honest here, you know, we are set up for ethical failure. We are set up for humanist like degradation. We are not allowed to bring everybody with us, or you know what I mean? And it's not our fault. And here we have this all pervasive system that if you don't give a shit about human beings, you're successful, and you know, can sleep well at night or whatever. I mean, I'm guessing they can. But if you do, you are riddled with conundrums. If you do care about people, you go to sleep every night being like, fuck, I have to do this. Why did I do this? Is it okay to do this? Like, it's all pervasive. There's no escaping this like ideology. And so I think a lot of it will have to come from, you know, the communal structures, the conversations. And once those get strong enough, I mean, the complete breaking of like ideals, you know. And another thing I wanted to say about earlier is a lot of these power hierarchies are I want to say human nature, but human nature under this umbrella, right? So like, you know, there's one thing I always think about, and it's a well-known thing. It's called the Stanford prison experiment, where a psychologist led this experiment where he took his class, divided them in half. You guys are the prisoners and you guys are the guards. And we're talking about a make-believe experiment. Everybody knew what was going on, and it got violent within days, you know? And that power, and this goes with a lot of federalism, I think. Once you get power, you no longer look at human beings the same way. Again, it's the otherizing. Once you have a gun in your hand, you no longer view other people the same as before when you had that. You know, you have this, it's a power, right? And I think too often power is you know, it's like the word power is sometimes synonymous with like a positive thing, as in like gaining something, but I think that should be broken, because when you get power, you no longer look at the people around you the same, right? And we saw it with college students, you know what I mean, that knew what they were doing. So now you get into this culture idea of like, oh, you went to I don't even know. It's like a few months of training, for whatever. Okay, you're a cop now. You did the push-ups, you did the pull-ups, you took the classes, you can do CPR. Here's the fucking gun. Go out and do your job. These people no longer look at human life the same. So for me and you saying like, oh my God, this person got shot in the back 7 times. It's barbaric. It's awful. These people literally don't look at human life the same as we do. And it's really disturbing to me. And that is a part of this systemic structure, the systemic violence, and the systemic racism, it's really a huge, like me and you are sitting here saying Jacob Blake got shot in the back, and my stomach hurts thinking about it. I can say confidently that those people don't react fundamentally in their bodies the same to violence as I do, because they sit in a position of power culturally, and physically with weapons, and once you have that, you look at the outside beyond your body, beyond your physical structure differently. And we've seen it proven in controlled experiments,
Well, that's why I think the system, we keep saying it's not reform. It needs to be completely replaced. And a lot of this, like we talk about the conundrum that we live in, right? Like our knowledge of this and this consciousness that we have that leads us to these ethical conundrums. And Stephen, this is something that you and I have explored on the show before, but it's like the system literally creates the mental health crisis that most of this country lives in. And this is something in that book by Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism, where like this new generation of people dealing with depression and anxiety, you're prescribed medication for it, but nobody's looking at the root cause of it. And the root cause of it comes from this system that has put us in these ethical conundrums, like the stealing bread for your family thing. The real ethical conundrum is what happens to that bread when it's not purchased or stolen? It gets spoiled and thrown away, right? Like it goes bad and nobody eats it. That's the true ethical issue with that whole equation. And that's why you have to get beyond the system that we're currently in, because it's made to make us depressed and have to choose, like you said, Alex, the lesser of two evils. Whereas we can completely get together and reimagine a situation where there isn't a lesser of two evils, where the resources are allocated to everybody, where nobody is left wanting, right? Nobody's left in need. And so that's I don't know, it's such a overwhelming thing to think about because we've been raised in it, right? That it is hard to imagine life outside of it. But I think that's where we are starting to move. And that's why seeing things and I'm not, intentionally trying to bring it back to sports because of the show and what we do, but that's why I think it's important that we start to see things like entertainers, like basketball players striking, right? Going on strike and going, no, we're not fucking doing this, right? It's the step towards the larger consciousness of thinking outside of the current system.
Yeah, we today we were talking about the decision that the players are gonna they're gonna return to the court, I believe, on Friday. And I tweeted this earlier, but I just said they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't.
Yeah,
those players are in one of the more unique situations in the world. They are, they represent the top 1% of income earners in the Black community. They fund a number of programs personally. They're responsible for a number of their family members and things, being able to live well. At the same time, they're all Black men, and they've got social media saying one thing. They probably got their family saying another thing. They've got the NBA owners and sponsors saying another thing. They're being pulled in so many different directions to try to make the quote unquote right decision. And I just believe all those players need to do what's best for them. They need to look at their families first, the larger community second, and then make a decision on what they're going to do. And whatever decision that they make, they need to be willing to support that decision and move forward.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go.
I was just going to say, we keep talking about what the players are doing and it's great, but I feel like the louder conversation needs to be, when are the fucking owners going to do something? Like, I've just seen, so like, it's literally the two LA teams, the two teams, Alex, that you and I cover are the two teams that were like, we're not playing. We don't want to play. And which is great. And it's crazy because those teams have the most to lose, really, at the end of the day. But like, and we keep, applauding them for doing what they're doing. And dude, we literally had Zion Williamson. He was months into his career in the NBA, paying for arena workers' salaries when the season shut down, and the owner's worth billions. Like, when are the fucking owners going to step in and do something? Like, and you know what? The team I cover, Bomber's done some really good things, but Bomber, you're also the richest owner in sports, making, and everybody's like, he made a statement against racism. That's so fucking basement level of what Steve Ballmer should be doing. The like anti-racist post is for the people that are working their 9-to-5 jobs, right? Doing that stuff like that's okay. Dude, you literally have access to the most powerful people in this country, and you are one of them having that much money. Fuck your post, go do something meaningful. Take your billions of dollars and go do something with it. Otherwise, you're not about it. You're not about it. I'm sorry, but like, the owners do not give a shit until we actually see something happen.
One thing I do want to say about this, though, and I think about this a lot too, and sure, in a resource-driven economy, we do. It would be great if these owners did something. Another thing I think about, though, and I do agree that the owners need to do more, obviously. But another thing I think about, and this is more recently, is when the oppressed are looking to the oppressors for help. I don't think that's true subversion, and I don't
That's
want,
fair.
and I don't want, I don't need, I mean, I don't want, maybe I need, but I don't want to look to the rich white men for change. And that's what I'm saying is, like, how can we ask these, sociopaths to help our movement when our movement is what they've made their billions of dollars on top of, or our labor, you know what I mean? Totally. And so that's what I do feel a little weird. And another thing it does is it takes power away from the people, right? We're sitting here and we're saying, okay, like, the players are doing all this stuff. I do, and this isn't to say I disagree. I do agree that, like, it shouldn't be on the players, but I don't want to sit here and look to these billionaires for their help. I don't want them to sit. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, change is only going to come on the back. That's some fucking Batman shit. You know what I mean? Batman, the ultimate capitalist in the world, I'm not here to, what I want to do is look horizontally out at my community and say, like, there is power here. Okay. We don't need Bomber, and we don't need these fucking billionaires, because guess what? That's how we got here in the first place, and the thing with pro sports in the NBA and what you're talking about, Alex, with, professional athletes are the 1% of Black America. My problem with that is, and I've said this on our show before, when your market, like, if we sit back and think about the most publicized and marketed form of vertical movement in the US for Black people, we think of pro sports, we think of entertainment industry, we think of music, acting, and that is by far the least likely to happen. So when I'm sitting here thinking, when we're sitting here thinking up, like, oh, what's the number one form of vertical movement for Black youth, and the least likely things come to our mind, that is strategic to me. That is a method of holding an entire population down. And that's why I think, I mean, I understand as that athletes are humans, and, like, believe me, I'm all about it, and I love it. But I want to take that equal attention and power and social and cultural weight, and, like, give it to our communities and say, oh, we can support each other and we can help each other out, because we have to look, and I mean, the players are a part of that. I would say, I think the players are a part of that because they are the labor in this situation. You
Right.
know what I mean? And me and Brian also talk about the cultural currency that they have that is like super valuable, very valuable for any movement. So, but yeah, I want to, and this is just me. I think more about like I'm done depending on these owners. I'm done depending on, and this goes for politics too. I'm done depending on, you know, this system that is propped up on, you know, insufficient wages and unhealthy, you know, labor practices. You know, like they're not going to give it to us. The billionaires are not going to give anything to us. And you know, I think the NBA owners are talking about donating $1 million a year. Like
That's nothing.
that's absurd, and
Yeah,
it's so
that's an
crazy.
offensive amount of money.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point, Stephen. That's a super insightful perspective on that, and that's definitely something I'm gonna sit with for a little while because I like that you're totally right about that. And like, you know, your point to the politicians, like I think that a lot of times, especially like, you know, left leaning people can stand politicians, and I think that can be problematic. Like you and I both wanted Bernie, right, to make it through the primaries, but at the same time, Bernie refuses to say that he wants to defund the police, and it's like, dude, if you're not on that fight, then you're not with us. Like then cool, like move on, like get out of the way. And that's, you know, I think that the left can kind of stand those things to their own detriment at times, and so you need to keep the forward motion at the forefront, and anybody who doesn't represent that needs to get out of the way. But yeah, thank you for saying that, dude, because that's a really good point. We're almost at an hour here. I figured we can probably wrap it up pretty soon. Alex, dude, thank you so much for joining us, man. This was awesome. I really appreciate you speaking, giving your perspective, taking the time to talk to us. And on top of that, dude, thank you for starting Crossover and letting us into that family. This has been amazing being a part of this and growing this with everybody. And, you know, yesterday jumping on with some of the other hosts on the network was awesome, getting to like really speak to them for the first time, and hear their stories and all of that. So, man, Alex, I'm going to kind of give you the floor to close us out here. Any final thoughts you have, anything, you know, you've got a bunch of shows and so much that you're constantly working on. You're one of the busiest people I know. So, you know, feel free to plug whatever, say whatever, man. The floor is yours to close us out here.
Thanks. Well, look, shout out to you, Brian, and you, Stephen, for allowing me to come on on your show. And thank you for even wanting to be a part of Crossover. I think it's a novel idea, and there's a number of things I'm trying to tackle. So I'm incredibly, along with having a 9-to-5, I've got like this other 9-to-5 that I'm trying to make work. So thank you guys for being a part of it. I'll say this, I guess, as my parting words. I've stayed away from social media the last couple hours because everyone's arguing about what the NBA players should and shouldn't do. And I've just opted to kind of back up and leave it alone. I'll say that regardless if the NBA players strike or not, I would argue that impact would still be minuscule on the larger issues at hand, whatever the players decide to do. If you want to at least quickly force billionaires' hands, a good part of the country needs to walk out of their jobs for a whole week and watch shit stop. The Amazon employees, the bank employees, all these regular people like you and I, walk out of your job for a week. Let half the country do that. And that might actually force change rather than 300 players saying they won't jump on TV and play. So I'll say that part. And I did want to say the fact that Zion Williamson, a first generation millionaire, had to go and pay for employees of the Pelicans when Gail Benson has billions of dollars. That infuriated me. Yeah. It really did. But we're building something here at Crossover. I'm not doing it alone. Every single host that's a part of every single podcast or the hosts that are doing live streams, we're building something here. And it's, for me, I've always said they wouldn't give me a seat at the table, so I'll build my own damn table. And that's what I'm trying to do. And with like-minded people, I don't expect us to agree on every single point. but I expect there to be like a common thread of decency amongst everybody that opts to kind of push this thing forward. And I think there is. And I think it's value in sharing these unique stories that everybody has, because, you know, you don't have to be famous to have impactful words. You can just be a regular person off the street and you could have something impactful to say. And I think that all the different hosts have impactful things to say, and they're trying to make change within their little bubbles and their little slice of the world. So I'm appreciative of that. Those who listen to this or watch this, I started out, I do host Lakers Central. I'm a huge Lakers fan. And then, there's Off the Record, me and three of my childhood friends that we jumped together and decided to do a podcast. And then there's the Crossover Podcast, which is more 60-minute style, me going one-on-one with people from all around the world from different backgrounds. And so I am incredibly blessed to be able to do this. I'm incredibly fortunate to have a wife that is super supportive of me trying all these different things. Many people are, talk about they're afraid to get married and they don't, they feel like that might give up a sense of themselves, or they might have to get permission. I've never found marriage to work that way. My wife is super supportive of what I want to do, and I am likewise supportive of what she wants to do. She's a mental health clinician. She left one of the most well-known hospitals in Maryland. It's one of the most well-known in the world, but she worked in Maryland, one of the most well-known mental health hospitals in the world. She left that because of the stress at her job, and she opted in the middle of a pandemic to start her own company. And I am incredibly, I admire her for doing so, taking that on, but by saying, look, this is too much. This company's not doing everything that they need to do. I'm going to take this in my own hands, the skills, the education that I have, and do this and help people in a way that I think they need to be helped. And she did not need my permission to do so. I'd rather her be happy and us miss a few payments on bills than for her to be unhappy and us live the quote unquote American dream. So those are my parting words.
Alex, thank you so much, man. I can't really, besides letting us in and giving us a platform to yell and rant about our thing, it also is very, the whole build your own table thing is very inspiring to us. And so it is something that we think about a lot, and it's good, not just for us, but for everybody to have an example of that in front of them. So you're doing God's work, as I would say. So thank you so much, man.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody. We will be back with our we dropped an episode yesterday, Ball is Live, where we talked to a good friend of ours, Sam Bosson. So be sure to check that out. Check out all of Alex's shows. And we will see you next week, either in audio or video form. Thank you for joining us. Big hugs, big love. Thank you, everybody.
Hell yeah.